Okay, welcome to the presentation on reflexive verbs. I want to remind you that you have a few different resources that you can use in addition to this presentation. Page 119 in your textbook has the grammar explanation as well. And remember, you can also go to classzone.com and you can access the animated grammar video. The link is here, but if you type in Class Zone and make your way to the Spanish 2 Avancemos book, you can find that as well. If you choose to do the animated grammar, here are a few guiding questions for you to think about as you watch. On that same page with animated grammar, you also have the English connection and the textbook's explanation presented again. So on your guided notes page, I want you to follow along with me and complete the different sections and take notes along the way. So first, let's think about the purpose and function of reflexive verbs. When we have a reflexive verb, the whole point is that the action is reflecting back on the subject in some way. So this is something that someone is doing to himself, herself, itself, or to themselves. In Spanish, we have actually two different functions for reflexive verbs. The first is just what it sounds like, when the action's reflecting back on the subject. The second purpose, though, in Spanish is that sometimes a normal verb, when it becomes reflexive, has a slight meaning change. And in your vocab list, you have an example with dormir. So we know dormir on its own is to sleep, but when it becomes reflexive, dormirse, the meaning changes slightly to fall asleep. So keep that in mind, that normally it's when the action reflects on the subject, but it can also be a slight meaning change. And really, reflexive verbs in some ways are review, because in Spanish 1, you learn ¿Cómo te llamas? How do you call yourself? It's not what is your name. The literal meaning is how do you call yourself? And we know we answer, Me llamo Miss Warrick, or whatever your name might be. So I call myself this. That is a reflexive verb in action. So just to recap, the action of the verb is reflecting back on the subject. These are actions done to oneself or for oneself. In English, we express that usually by adding self or selves with our description. So I dried myself off, or I wash my face. Sometimes we even use possessives. But in Spanish, we need to use the reflexive pronoun with our verb conjugation. I want to remind you, though, that reflexive pronouns are not the same as subject pronouns. With the reflexive verb, you can use the subject pronoun in addition to the reflexive pronoun, but you cannot omit the reflexive. It is required. So, if we take a look at formation, these are the reflexive pronouns, and they always stay the same, no matter what tense you're in, no matter what the reflexive verb is. So, me, if your subject is yo, te if it's tu, se if the subject is él, ella, or usted, nos for nosotros, os for vosotros, and se for ellos, ellas, ustedes. So note that the third person, singular and plural, is the same pronoun. However, you're going to change the conjugation of your verb to show the subject as well. We're going to talk about pronoun placement. Generally, it's similar to what we've seen before when it comes to pronouns. If you have a simple single conjugated verb, you put the pronoun in front of that conjugation. If you have an infinitive, you attach it to the end. So we have two examples, me llamo versus llamarse. But let's go into a little bit more detail. So with an infinitive, always attach your pronoun to the end of that infinitive form. So like our vocab list, lavarse, secarse, ducharse, bañarse. If you're conjugating one single verb, whether it's present tense, imperfect, doesn't matter, always put your reflexive pronoun in front of your conjugated form. So me baño, present tense, me bañé, preterite. Me goes in front no matter what. But if you're working with a compound verb form, so simple future, ir plus a plus the infinitive, tener que to talk about obligation, pensar to talk about plans, you have two options. You can put the reflexive pronoun in front of your conjugated verb, or you can attach it to the end of your infinitive. So we've seen this before. Here's an example with simple future. Me voy a duchar. Using our verb ducharse, conjugating it Conjugating ir because that's our main verb, but changing my pronoun to show that it's something I'm doing to myself. I can also say voy a ducharme with the reflexive pronoun attached to my infinitive. So I have both options. And I have that same option with other compound structures, and you can see a few of those on your guided notes page. So here are a couple of more for you to take a look at. Voy a lavarme la cara, attached. Me voy a lavar la cara, before the conjugated form. Vas a lavarte la cara. Notice how the conjugation changes and the reflexive pronoun. They both agree. We have the to form here, and we have the te reflexive pronoun. Te vas a lavar la cara, so I have the same forms, but I move my pronoun in front of my simple conjugated verb here. Necesito lavarme la cara. Me necesito lavar la cara. So both of these are correct. They both mean the same thing. It's only though when you have these compound structures that you have multiple options. Pensamos lavarnos la cara. Nos pensamos lavar la cara. Quiero lavarme la cara. Me quiero lavar la cara. So you have some flexibility when it comes to a compound structure. I want you to take a moment and pause and do these regular examples on your guided notes page. So go ahead and hit pause, and for the first set, you're providing the missing reflexive pronoun. So complete those now. After you've finished, go ahead and do the opposite for lavarse. You have the conjugation, or you have the pronoun and you provide the conjugation. A couple of things to be careful of. Not all verbs are reflexive, and we're going to talk about that more in class tomorrow. How do you know if they are reflexive from the infinitive form? Answer that. You should have said, there's a se on the end. That always tells you if that verb primarily works as a reflexive verb. Like we've said in class, some verbs can be both reflexive and normal, but the meaning might change. And not all verbs can become reflexive. There are some that are always on their own. And we're going to look at examples as we work in class tomorrow. So let's think about these. These are some verbs that have both options. They can be non-reflexive, meaning that you're doing this to someone else, or they can be reflexive, meaning that you're doing it to yourself. So despertar versus despertarse, to wake someone else up, to wake yourself up. Dormir, dormirse, to sleep, to fall asleep. Lavar, lavarse, to wash yourself. So we do have some cases where both are possible, but the meaning is different. These are also some verbs where the meaning changes in a slightly different way as well. Comer, we typically think just means to eat. However, it does have a special reflexive form, and the meaning changes to eat up. It's like the idea of to gobble something up. This one is less common than the normal though. Levantar, we've talked about too. On its own, to lift, reflexive, to get yourself up. Morir actually changes. It means to die normally. If you change it to reflexive, it has a softer meaning of to pass away. And ir on its own means to go, but when you make it reflexive, it means to leave or go away. So those are a few examples to think about. I want you to do some practice on your guided notes page, so you can take a moment to pause. There are some basic conjugations I want you to do using the subject provided. Don't forget your reflexive pronouns, and you can conjugate these in the basic present tense. Some of them are stem changing verbs, so make sure you think about how they stem change before you conjugate. There are also some translations, a little bit of an extension challenge, and then I want you to do some short writing describing your daily routine in the morning, and be sure to use sequencing words to help practice vocab. If you want some additional practice, there's also a textbook exercise on page 120, exercise 6, that you can do as well. The final thing that I want you to do after practice, at the bottom of your guided notes, is to write any clarification questions that you have for class tomorrow. Come in with good, detailed, specific questions, and be prepared to jump into practice when we come back.